So everybody, welcome to this session. I'm just here to introduce Claire. I just want to say that a little bit about her, obviously, and that it's a really gushing little speech of it. Claire's obviously a fantastic acupuncturist. She qualified with a first-class degree from Middlesex University and just has a wealth of experience in improving people's lives since. It's a bit unfair, but that isn't what makes her special. She's dedicated her career to trying to make what I think we can all agree is an important and underutilized medical approach as accessible and available to as many people as possible. She works at the community clinic in Hove, started her own community clinic in Seaford, and when COVID came, she teamed up with other practitioners to make acupuncture accessible to the NHS staff with Acupuncture for NHS project. She also runs the Association of Community and Multibed Acupuncture Clinics, spearheading a number of initiatives to support pre-existing clinics and roll out new ones across the UK. Her ongoing commitment to the expansion of our profession is just an inspiration for all of us, and I'm proud to call her a friend. If everyone could welcome Claire to the stage for the talk.
Thank you very much, Joe. Those were very kind words. You're very generous. Thank you. And thank you, everybody, for coming. It's really nice to see so many of you here to hear a bit more about multibeds. Before I start, I just wanted to ask how many of you have worked in multibeds? Okay. So a few of you. So I apologise to some of you if some of this appears like stuff you already know, but I just wanted to make sure that it covered everything for those who haven't, worked in a multi-bed environment before. So I'm just going to start by kind of letting you know the framework that I'm going to be following today. So I'm going to start by telling you a bit about myself and how I got to be standing in front of you today talking about multi-beds, so a bit of my background. I'm then going to move on to what is a multi-bed, because actually it can be many things. Then we're going to look at what the benefits are for patients, for us as practitioners, and then obviously for the acupuncture profession as a whole. Then I just want to discuss why now. Why do I think it's a good time for us to proceed with the model? And then talk to you a little bit about BAcC and how you can get involved, and then open up for any questions that you guys might have about things. So that was just to let you know how it's going to run this morning. So I want to start with a bit about me. As Joe said, I'm a graduate at Middlesex University, and for that reason I was very lucky. The Middlesex degree programme is twinned with the Beijing University of TCM. So if any of you are familiar with that, it's one of China's first institutions for higher learning in TCM. So if any of you are fans of the applied channel theory, Dr. Wang Juyi, he's actually a graduate of the Beijing University, so it was a real privilege to go and do my clinical placement there. And this is a photograph of the Shiyuan Hospital, which is where most of their integrated clinical placement work is carried out. And the reason I bring this up is because this is the first place that I ever saw a multi-bed in action. I'd really now like to show you slides of inside the clinic, but because I went to China in 2007 and there was no Facebook and no smartphones, I can't find any pictures. I can't find the hard drive or whatever I've put them on, so I'm going to have to just describe it to you. It's a room probably a quarter of the size of this one. It had 10 couches in it, 1 doctor, 2 clinic assistants. The clinic started around 8 a.m. and it was pretty full on from the moment that it opened. The clinic assistants would put the patient in the couches, the doctor would access the notes from the end of the couch, and then he would ask a few questions, tongue, pulse, needles, onto the next one. His clinic assistants would take the needles out and put new patients in place, and so the clinic was a continuous stream of practice from 8 a.m. till around 1 p.m. So for me as a student practitioner, I was quite taken aback by what was happening, the speed, the efficacy, the talent of the doctor. It was constant and full on and really inspiring, but also really intimidating. And I was really also surprised that I'd never seen clinics like this at home. All my clinical work in the UK was in our London clinic, which was private one-to-one based stuff. We did do the pain clinic at the Whittington Hospital, which was multi-bed in a way, but because there were curtains around each couch and groups of students with each patient, it didn't have that same dynamic atmosphere as what I was seeing at the Shiwan. So it really stuck with me, and it was definitely something one of the specific memories that I took away from my placement in Beijing. When I got home and I graduated, I decided I did what we all do really, and I went into private practice, and I subsequently, after finding an advert in the BAcC classifieds, decided to go out and do acupuncture at sea. So I did, many of you have probably seen it, I worked with Steiner. And the reason I bring this up is because another thing that I'd found really interesting in China was the fact that we saw the same patients day after day, which again was not something I was used to. In one-to-one practice in the UK, you see your patient once a week, maybe even once every 2 weeks. Some of them it's even only once a month. And so to see them day after day in China until the outcomes have been made was really interesting to me, but not something I had personal experience of till I went on the ship. Now on the ship, every 7 to 14 days, you have new passengers. So you're selling them treatment packages of 3 to 5 treatments that get done in a close proximity of time. So that was my first opportunity to see how effective that is for treatment outcomes. So again, that's something that kind of went alongside the efficiency that I'd seen with the multi-bed, is the fact that a multi-bed can allow a patient to actually have acupuncture in the way that it's meant to be done, one could argue. When I returned home, I ended up working as part of Complete Fertility, which is an IVF unit. And so I was doing what lots of us probably do. Inadvertently, I was specialising in women's health and particularly fertility. And before I knew it, 90% of my patients were fertility. So that's fine if that's what you want to do and you want to specialise. But for me, I missed having variety in my patients. So I decided to make a big step, and Complete Fertility is in Southampton. It's at the Princess Anne Hospital. You may know it from One Born Every Minute. That's where most people have heard of it from. But I decided to make a move to Brighton, which many of my colleagues thought was completely mental, because I already had quite a good gig going here, and Brighton's full of acupuncturists. What are you going to do there? But I just decided that that's what I wanted to do. So I moved to Brighton, and at the same time I decided to take on a paediatric diploma at Kickham, because it was the last time that Julian Scott was going to run the course, and I felt maybe that would offer me that variety to look at women's health, fertility, obstetrics, and then move to paediatrics. But then I also fell pregnant with my first son, and so my practice went on hold a little bit while I tried to do that and raise a baby and what have you. But while doing that, I often had moments of wondering how I would return to practice, because I did miss treating patients. And that is when I stumbled upon these organisations. Now, I'm assuming that most of you will have heard of these, and if you haven't, I suggest writing down the website details underneath. Working Class Acupuncture was established by Lisa Relida and Skip Van Meter in Portland, in Oregon, in the States. They started relatively small, with only 12 patients per week, and within 8 years, they were up to 460 to 500 patients a week and employing 20 staff. So that gives you some sense of what WCA are and what they've achieved. The other organisation is POCA, or the People's Organisation of Community Acupuncture, and they're actually how I ended up stumbling upon ACMAC. They're essentially the American equivalent. And for those of you who are new to these groups and this information, I would strongly advise you going to the BAcC website. On the About Us page, you'll find Community Acupuncture, the Calmest Revolution Ever Staged, which is a fantastic 35-minute documentary, just a little bit about working class and how it's set up. So I'd strongly recommend checking that out. I would also have to now do a small bit of fangirling about Lisa. Lisa's really accomplished and she has a great wealth of experience in community acupuncture. She's written several books, as you can see. She also has a lot of free resources online, and she's a real friend of BAcC and just a real friend of community acupuncture, and a really nice woman as well, with plenty of free resources, and she's always willing to answer questions, and yeah, she's just really nice. So check her out if you haven't already. She's been a keynote speaker for us at BAcC a couple of times, and though they practice differently in America and the American healthcare system is different, if we were being a little bit pessimistic, there's every chance that we might end up having a similar healthcare system to them one day. So I think we can learn a lot from Lisa and Skip and BAcC. On that note, she also, along with the rest of the BAcC community, they developed BAcC Tech, which again is a very impressive institution where they produce community acupuncturists. So they've changed the way that they do the education of the students so that when you leave, you're really set up to go out into community acupuncture work. So again, lots of free resources on that website. It's a great place to find out a bit more. So when I decided it was time for me to return to practice, when I'd finished, well, I wasn't quite finished, but I was nearly finished the diploma and my son was getting older. And so I, again, returned to the classifieds in Acu and was trying to find, because remember I was in Brighton and I didn't have an established practice. So I was looking for inroads back in, but I'd kind of fallen in love with this idea of community acupuncture when I'd found Lisa and Skip and watched that documentary. I got really enthused at the idea of doing that kind of work. And that's how I found out about BAcC, actually, because I was looking for a UK equivalent to BAcC and that kind of work. So that was in my mind. And so when I saw a classified advert for a receptionist at a multibed in Hove, I was on the phone immediately and seeing if I could do that for them. So I started doing reception on a Saturday at Hove Community Acupuncture. So Hove Community Acupuncture is run by, at that time, a group of 6 practitioners. There's 6 couches and 2 practitioners per clinic. So when I walked into that room that first Saturday, it was the closest I'd ever got to that multi-bed at the Shiyuan. And so I was immediately into it and I was inspired. And luckily, because I was already trained and qualified, I was able to become a locum and eventually a permanent member of the team. So, but interestingly enough, at that time, I didn't realise that I also was part of a team with the founder of BAcC, Charlie. I didn't realise she was one of the wider team or indeed the founder of BAcC. And Katie to the right there, so Charlie's on the left, Katie on the right, who I'd been working with for some time, was actually the current coordinator. So when I joined the team and realised we were members of BAcC and got to know that they were in fact running BAcC, that's when I started to attend conference and learn more about multi-beds. And so that's essentially how I got really inspired, and multi-beds and community acupuncture became the main focus of my practice. So that's just a little bit about me. This is the bit that potentially for you guys who have worked in multi-beds, this might be a little bit of repetition or stuff that you already know, so apologies for that. But for the rest of you, I just wanted to let you know a little bit about how many different forms a multi-bed can take. Because it's really interesting to me when I was researching to do this talk. Back in 2008, Charlie, the founder of BAcC, wrote some papers. One went in the JCM and the AACP's journal. And it was looking at multi-beds because at that time it was like a new model of practice. And I found it really interesting that it's quite difficult to define a multi-bed. So what she did was just propose that it's where any practitioner treats more than one patient per hour in the same room at the aim of making acupuncture affordable. Because really that's the only common thing, because you'll find that there are so many different ways that you can actually set up and run a multi-bed. What I wanted to do here now was talk about some really good and strong examples of existing multi-beds that are already operating in the UK, and some of which are BAcC members. So I'm going to start with my friend Joe's clinic, and I'm going to get him and his team to introduce themselves, because it's a great way for you to see inside the clinic.
At its basic, acupuncture is just us inserting really fine needles into different locations across the body. And those locations will have specific healing outcomes that we'll be looking to use. The main reason I set up the community acupuncture clinics is to make it more accessible for people. The community clinics are sort of the best model, and we've innovated in every way that we can to make it as open to everyone.
I joined here last September, and more and more people are coming. Because of its affordable price, that people are more willing to come for treatment for a period of time.
I always wanted to be able to offer treatments to everyone, not for those who can afford, but for those that cannot afford a one-to-one treatment. And I really enjoy treating people in the community.
I'm quite a social person, so I like to help as many people as I can. And I really like the concept of it, that it's affordable acupuncture to all those people who really need it.
Okay, so that gives you a little glimpse into Joe and his team's clinics. They offer just under 100 appointments a week. There's 5 practitioners, 5 practitioners across 5 locations. And it's also worth mentioning that they have 1 practitioner per session with 3 couches, and they do 4 treatments an hour. Now, I think that the reason that they're able to do the 4 an hour is because of the app which Joe has developed, Your Clinic, where he's kind of streamlined a lot of the processes so that patients are doing their intake forms and various other parts before they arrive online. So that has meant that they can condense the time for the appointment. And the other great thing about Your Clinic and the community acupuncture team is that they are therefore collecting outcomes data, which is something that I'll be talking about later. The other thing I wanted to add is that they are looking to expand into Cheltenham, so if anyone is local to that area and interested in working in a multi-bed, speak to Joe. Sorry, he did tell me about this. So the next one, again, some of you may have heard of this clinic. It's called Source Point in Devon. And again, I will let them introduce themselves a little, and I'll just expand after that.
SourcePoint's community acupuncture service is a multi-bed, multi-practitioner model. What that means is you're treated in one large room with many different beds. So your acupuncturist will treat 3 people simultaneously. Multi-practitioner means that you'll see different practitioners. And the strength of that model is that you get lots of second opinions and support and different styles and skill sets from each practitioner. SourcePoint offers acupuncture through 4 different services. The first service is free at point of delivery, and we're funded by the National Lottery for that. What that means...
Oh, I'm sorry. So essentially, what I wanted to, that's the reason I wanted to talk about SourcePoint. I wanted to try and stop it there so it didn't confuse the message. But the main reason I wanted to discuss SourcePoint is what makes them quite special is the fact that they've managed to fund some of their clinics through the National Lottery. Now, they're established as a CIC, which enables them to do that. But I think it's really interesting to know that that's something that's possible. In 2016, they received their first big lottery grant, and that was for a chronic pain clinic. But even more interesting, I think, is that they've also managed to obtain follow-up funding to maintain that service. So that does mean that really low-income patients can receive their treatments for free. So I think that SourcePoint is a really interesting clinic to look at if you're looking at starting in community acupuncture and multibeds. I also love the way they discuss pricing on their website because they really break it down in a way that patients can understand. Often we recommend doing sliding scales for clinics, and I think the way that SourcePoint present what the sliding scale is and what it means and how patients should use it is really good. So it's definitely worth looking at. I think also just going back to SourcePoint, I think they've subsequently received lottery funding to do a mental health clinic. So, I mean, it's really been fantastic what they've been able to achieve. So I'm assuming that many of you will have heard of this clinic. The Gateway Clinic is obviously extremely famous. It was established in 1992, and they see a massive 12,000 patients a year. So I feel like they just basically are the answer to the beginning title of this talk, How to Get Acupuncture to the Many, and is to do this. Gateway's a multi-bed. It's run by 6 practitioners. It is a multidisciplinary clinic, so there's also involvement from physios and other healthcare professionals, physios, occupational health therapists, podiatrists, neurologists. There are specific referral criteria for this clinic. You have to have chronic pain, but that includes musculoskeletal and neurological, severe headaches or migraine, or HIV patients. But the other great thing about this clinic is they are collecting outcomes data. This is actually from way back in 2012, but you can see that 96% of 400 patients found that they had either moderate or significant improvement from treatment. So that's, a fantastic result. I mean, it does beg the question of how a clinic that appears to be this successful has not been replicated, but I guess that's another discussion. The other interesting thing I think is that they have very high compliance. 61% of the patients complete their full course of 10 treatments, which is, I think, really high. And the other interesting thing is that 86% of the patients are considered, in a chronic state with their condition. So 86% have had it for at least a year, and 49% of those have had it for over 5 years. So it's quite a difficult patient group and still getting that kind of level of outcome. So I think it's, again, if you haven't looked at Gateway, it's definitely one to look at if you're considering the benefits of multibed. So this is where I work, Hove Community Acupuncture. We've been established since 2007. We run 4 clinics a week. We are a team of 4 practitioners now, and we have appointments available for about 100 treatments a week. The main reason I wanted to talk about HCA was really so I could give some more idea of how clinic growth is possible. So though we were established in 2007, we didn't start collecting stats on the clinic till 2014. But it's really interesting to see how the number of treatments we've been performing has steadily risen. So in 2014, we were seeing around 1,300, or we were doing around 1,300 treatments a week. And that steadily grew until just before the pandemic, it was like 2,500. In the year, in 2014, annually, we were seeing about 1,200 patients. We became really good just then. And then that steadily increased year on year. Now, obviously, this has been affected by the pandemic. But in 2019, it was 2,519 treatments that we'd done in a year. So, and I actually, looking at the stats, was really impressed with what we've done even looking at pandemic numbers. Because actually, considering how we had to minimise our service, so in 2020, we were closed for 4 months, and then we reopened cautiously, as I'm sure many of you did, with 1 practitioner, 2 couches, and we still, in 2020, saw over 1,000 patients. And we found ourselves to be inundated with patients ever since. We've got waiting lists, we're extremely busy. And in the year to date, the figures up till August, we're already at nearly 2,000 appointments. So I just really wanted to highlight that because it just really shows the need and the desire for community acupuncture and accessible acupuncture. So just before I move on, I also wanted to just not leave out some of the other ways you can do multi-bed is multi-chair, okay? So it doesn't have to be couches. There's a brilliant example of this in Brighton. One of my colleagues, Sora, was one of the founding practitioners of Pathways to Health, which I'm sure some of you may have heard of. That's a multi-chair clinic. They're actually a registered charity. They started in 1997. And they have a sliding scale from £5 to £15 because they just do auricular acupuncture. And they use household income to help patients to be guided on what they should pay on that scale. Another great example is Suffolk Community Acupuncture, which is run by one of BAcC's board members. And they've been open since 2013. It's just one practitioner with 8 zero-gravity lounges. And since they do about 44 appointments a week, and since they opened, they've seen 4,500 or done 4,500 appointments. So it just really, for me, another great thing about multi-beds is that flexibility that's there. You can set it up in a way that works for you and your colleagues and your space that's available and your community, of course. So I think it's fairly obvious what's in it for patients, but just in case, obviously what I found really interesting is Charlie did some research. There was another multi-bed in Brighton called the Dragon Acupuncture Clinic, which was established in 2003, and it was very busy, around 130 appointments a week. Unfortunately, they actually closed during the pandemic and haven't reopened, but when Charlie did the research with patients there in 2006, she found that 90% of patients were there because of the cost. And I'm sure that doesn't surprise anyone. The major benefit for patients is affordability and, of course, accessibility to the number of treatments they need, which, is going back to what I learned on the ship. If you need 2 or 3 treatments a week because you have a pain condition, then there's a possibility that you can have those in a multi-bed where the cost is not prohibitive. But I think another thing that people aren't always aware of is how much patients enjoy being treated in this type of clinic. But I'm going to let the patients tell you a bit about that.
Me, and I just feel like not only has it helped me medically and physically, there's kind of a spiritual component as well. Working class acupuncture reminds me of a place where you can just go, and as soon as you enter the doors, it's like going to a different world, peaceful and serene. Lends itself to an atmosphere of quietness and almost like it's very prayerful there. So I would certainly recommend it to anyone. In fact, I've been doing that.
And this is one of the patients at Source Point. And this is just talking about, I know often practitioners worry that patients won't be comfortable in a large room and sharing it with other patients. So this is just really to let you know how patients really feel about that.
We have a welcoming open plan clinic as well as private consultation rooms.
I don't find the open plan layout a problem. It's screened off for individual treatments. It's very quiet, you're not really aware too much of other people.
The open plan idea is quite nice because you can see that you're not alone. And if you've got a problem, all you've got to do is raise a hand and they're there.
Straight away, the group thing I found immensely relaxing. The benefits were, in an unusual way, kind of stronger.
I absolutely love the way he says that, because lots of people actually do express that opinion about it, that they feel that healing in that community environment is actually more powerful. So there's definitely a lot in this model for patients. Don't worry that they're not going to get the same level of benefit or be worried. Patients tend to really enjoy the multi-bed atmosphere and what it has to offer. Moving on to us, what's in it for us as practitioners? So you don't have to work in a team. You can do multi-bed individually, but I have to say that for me, one of my favourite aspects is working with a team. Essentially, it's, you have colleagues, so there can be a nice social aspect to that, but you're also working with, maybe in my clinic, we're multi-practitioner, and all of my colleagues, in fact, were trained at different institutions than myself and in different styles, which means that I have a lot to learn from them and they can learn something from me. So that, for me, that's really invaluable. And when you're not sure or you want some assistance with a patient, you can speak to your colleagues about that. That's not something that you get when you work on your own. Well, maybe you do, but it's not right there in the same room at the same time. So for any of you who have found it lonely working as an acupuncturist, that's another fantastic benefit of community acupuncture. Obviously, it's very rewarding making our medicine accessible to people. We all know how many people we think you could really benefit from treatment. And I mean, myself, I couldn't afford to receive private acupuncture. So that was always a problem for me. That's why this model has always been so attractive, because it means people like me can get acupuncture. And that's incredibly rewarding. And the fact that they can get the number of treatments they need means that they're going to walk out and promote acupuncture appropriately, rather than receiving one treatment and then saying it doesn't work. You know, at least you can work with people till they get to those outcomes, and then they become advocates for acupuncture. So I think that's a fantastic aspect. The other thing is experience. I mean, obviously at Hove, we see a patient every 20 minutes, 3 patients an hour. So that's 3 times more tongues, 3 times more pulses, and cumulatively over the year, you've really got a lot more clinical experience under your belt. And as I said before, I know that some people like to specialise, but for me, that wasn't appealing. And now at HCA, I have that capacity to almost be more of a GP. It's really varied, the patients that are coming through the door. So that's not for everybody, but it's fine. If you don't like variety, you can go to a pain clinic that's a multi-bed and just treat pain, or you could establish a fertility clinic that's a multi-bed. It's not to say that you have to do it that way, but I think that's a brilliant benefit of the model. The other thing I think people become concerned about is that they worry that it's not viable as a business model. So I just wanted to say that it really is, and it can be. As I showed you with some of the figures from HCA, there's real appetite for this type of acupuncture, and most community clinics will see growth over the years that they're established. I mean, Joe can vouch for that, he's nodding. And the other thing is, well, what was interesting that Lisa and Skip were saying is that, you know, when you establish your clinic, you have some open days where you offer free acupuncture, because remember that the best way to get people having acupuncture is to get them to have acupuncture. So I think in the face of the cost of living crisis, this is a great way of working to adopt for us as practitioners if we're worried about sustaining our clinics. Now, next I want to talk about what's in it for the profession more broadly. Now, in my opinion, the multi-bed model is the only way that acupuncture is going to end up in mainstream health. I don't think that it's possible for it to get there if we keep doing the one-to-one way. It's just the health economics is not there. The other great aspect which I think that we've missed in the multi-bed community is the potential for collecting outcomes data. And this is really interesting. I was just listening to Dr. in the keynote this morning, One Voice, Big Evidence. And that's essentially exactly what I wanted to point out here. I think I already told you some of those numbers. Gateway, 12,000 treatments a year. We were at 1,500. That could all turn into data. And if we all collected it in the same way and put it in the same place, then I think it could really be a way that we could open up some really interesting conversations with other healthcare professionals locally to ourselves and on a broader scale. And we could really look at expanding accessibility for patients via integration, which is something obviously we'll be talking about during the panel, which is after this. But I think a perfect example, my colleague Cara and I, we were part of the Acupuncture for NHS project, where we did collect outcomes data. Unfortunately, because we started that project during COVID, there were safe practice measures that meant it couldn't be in a multi-bed, which meant that ultimately we weren't able to continue it because funding became very difficult, whereas I think it would still be open if it had been a multi-bed. But the reason I mention it is because we collected outcomes data, and we found, similarly to the Gateway results, we had about 86% of patients who felt that they'd found improvement from treatment. And so when we finished the project, we were actually we were treating NHS staff, for those of you who aren't aware. We were treating only NHS staff, and it was during the lockdowns. So we were the only practitioners who were doing treatments at that time. But what that meant was that NHS staff were receiving acupuncture and receiving benefit. We then, when we had to close the project, we had a way into speaking to a local GP service with our outcomes data, and we've subsequently have been part of an initial cohort for a multidisciplinary trauma clinic, which has had its first we've done a first cohort of 40 patients, but they're looking to replicate that again later this year. But I think the key to forming that relationship was that capacity to talk in outcomes data and really have an inroad that was speaking the same language as the GPs and the practice managers. So if you want to know more about Acupuncture for NHS and Connection Works, which is the trauma service, then do come along to the panel, because Cara was the team lead and she has a lot more information on that. The other thing I would strongly recommend if you are considering opening a multi-bed, or you already have one, is considering starting to use something like Your Clinic. Your Clinic can help you manage your patients in terms of intake forms and different things, so it can streamline your service, but more importantly, it can collect outcomes data for you. It uses the MyMop, and if we all start to use it, it's going to put all of that data together, and then that's going to be a lot stronger. And it's going to be a place where patients can go and review the data, as well as other practitioners, and as well as other healthcare professionals. So the more of us who put into that, the more valuable it's going to become for all of us. At the moment, it's only in its infancy. I think 9 months they've been running it, and they've already had 2,000 appointments through here of 650 patients. So imagine the potential when there's, we're into the thousands of patients and appointments. If you do want to know more about Your Clinic, do go and find Joe and James in the foyer. So the next thing I wanted to just briefly discuss is why now? Why is now the right time for multi-beds? And I thought it was just nice to look at this symbol. I don't know if any of you read Chinese, so you know what this is. Weiji, that's right. So that's basically crisis. And some of you will know it was quite popularised that, for every way, danger, there's an opportunity. But in looking into this word a bit more, the more accurate translation of G is change point, which I thought was even more perfect for this, because I really feel like we are at a change point in how we should be practicing. I think we've been through a lot in the last few years. If you look, I use the word post-pandemic quite tentatively, because I'm sure you're all aware that COVID is definitely not gone anywhere, but the pandemic has gone, potentially. But it's definitely been a type of crisis. It's made us reflect on many areas of our lives. And I think if you combine that with the struggles that the NHS now faces and the cost of living crisis that our patients are facing, then to me, the only answer for that is more multi-beds, more accessible acupuncture. And I think there's some really key areas that we can help with, and we can really highlight how powerful our medicine is. If you look at it, chronic pain, we've just been reintroduced into the NICE guidelines for that. Mental health, it's everywhere. The environment we're living in is meaning there's more and more mental health problems, and patients are waiting a really long time to then get really not necessarily always ideal treatment. We can offer ideal treatment for mental health. We know that as acupuncturists. And then, of course, long COVID. So I think we've got like these 3 key areas where we could really show our strength if we approach those areas with the multi-bed model, made it accessible and affordable, and we collected the outcomes data, then I think we would have something really interesting to take to CCGs, practice managers, our local GPs. And for me, that's why now is a key moment. It's a change point after all the danger. So I'm sure you'd all agree. So I'm hoping now that those of you who don't work in multi-beds all want to now start a multi-bed. So this is where I'm going to talk a little bit about ACMAC. I'm the coordinator for ACMAC. We have tried to lift the mood at ACMAC by creating the ACMAC Avengers. For those of you who are familiar with the Avengers from Marvel, they're a group of superheroes that work together when there are planetary threats. So we like to think of ourselves as a group of acupuncturists working together in the face of a healthcare crisis. So please do come and join us. It really, to be honest, it's a fantastic organisation where you can meet other like-minded practitioners. You can meet people who are experienced in community acupuncture and people who are already doing it, so you don't have to make the same mistakes that they did. You can ask them questions. If you have a clinic, we can promote you on our website. We also have the obvious membership benefits. You can get discounts on subscriptions for your clinic, discounts on balanced healthcare, CPD with Naguan CPD, which is run by Alex Humphreys, or the CPD group, which is run by Paul Blacker, or Deborah Wolf's Acupuncture CPD. So there's lots of benefits there. But I would say most importantly, it's being part of our community and having that ability to share ideas and progress all together. Again, I'm going to go back to that one voice, big evidence. That, to me, that's exactly it. And I really think if we all work together, then we can work collectively to secure acupuncture's rightful place in mainstream healthcare. You know, together we achieve more. And I just really hope that lots of you will take more consideration of the multi-bed model and really think about what you can do for yourself as a practitioner and for your community with acupuncture. I'm just going to finish on a shameful plug for our own conference, which is actually taking place in York at the end of November. If you're not sure about BAcC, I mean, we're very affordable in terms of our membership and ticket prices. We're much the same as the clinics we provide. We want it to be affordable and accessible. But if you're not sure and you still have questions, come along to conference. It's online and it's in person at NCA, and you can really meet some of our community and you can ask them those questions. If you're interested in learning more about research, or Rebecca will be speaking about her new groundbreaking paediatric multi-bed. Judith will be talking about World Medicine and the way that they use the kind of multi-bed model in their refugee clinics. There's just lots of great content if this is the type of acupuncture that you're interested in. So thank you so much for your attention. And if you have any questions, please let me know.
Thank you. Yeah. I thank you very much. I think it's a wonderful model, and it's wonderful to hear about it. I'm just interested in the what you were talking about the sort of pricing in some of the clinics and the fact that there's a sliding scale. So how do the clinicians assess what the patient should be paying? Because it almost sounds a bit like a means test. And are some potential patients considered sort of too affluent to come to these clinics?
Really, it is up to the practitioners within each individual clinic how they want to do this bit. At ACMAC, we do recommend the sliding scale. So that would look at, Lisa breaks it down quite simply, so whatever the private rate is in your area, and then say you're going to see 3 patients per hour, and the going rate is £60, the bottom of your scale would be £20. So within that hour, you have the capacity to get back up to that full going rate. In terms of how you decide if someone is not paying enough, certainly within our clinic, it's at their discretion what they pay. But that's why I actually was pointing you towards the SourcePoint website. There are other ways to go about it, where you can be much more specific about who should be paying what in terms of your pricing. But it is actually down to the individual practitioners within the clinic. And some do just have a fixed rate, which might be half what the usual price is within their area. So, you need to have the microphone.
Oh, I don't.
Okay.
When we did the NHS project, we changed it from a single room and we went to multi-bed. We had a lot of problems with anaesthetists coming in and paying £15, and it drove me mental. So when we went into the second part of it, we put a sliding scale of recommendation for your band for the NHS.
that's for the NHS, but that worked for us, so that somebody would say, oh, I'm band 6, they want me to pay at least £30, and then they could add some more money on top of it if they felt they wanted to. That was a really clever way of doing it, because we just let them, they came for free at the start, and then they could just pay a base rate, and we couldn't keep going at that rate. So there can be ways of doing the scale like the NHS or like SourcePoint. It's a tricky one to navigate, but ask us some more questions, because I've got some ideas.
I've got a question. I have recently started a multi-chair type community acupuncture clinic, and I really wanted to collect data, but my patients are mostly pensioners, and their IT capabilities, or even their, they sometimes don't even have a phone, is very limited. So I was wondering how you handle this in your clinic.
What we did when we were collecting outcomes data as part of acupuncture for NHS was obviously because it was COVID and there was lots of, you can't touch the same, and there was lots of things going on with cross-contamination right at the beginning. And so the way that we set it up then was either to have ourselves, the practitioners, or the receptionist doing the input of data. That isn't actually how it then subsequently developed, but I think that would be the way to get around something like that.
So you don't have it before you see the patients. You do it yourself by asking, but you have the form and you...
If you wanted to use the full capacity of your clinic and you wanted to use the patient management aspects as well, it might be slightly more, you might need a little bit more time at the beginning to take the information from them and put it in, but I think you could use your clinic just in terms of collecting the data and continue to use whatever methods you're using for that other part of your clinic management if that was more convenient for you.
Thank you. And I've just another question. Do you always offer blocks of 10 treatments, or how does it work?
At the multibed where I work, I tend to speak to each patient at the end of their session about what I think is the best series of how many times I think they ought to come in based on their condition. So it's not in set blocks the way that I work, but other practitioners may do it differently.
Thank you. Oh, I am wowed. I'm just wowed. This is brilliant. This is where acupuncture needs
She's an
to
Avenger.
A couple of questions. I'm presuming that outcomes data thus far isn't showing a lesser effect for working in this way compared to the one-to-one plush carpet effect. And what I find interesting, and I'm not an acupuncturist, is presumably working this way and this quickly, as you said, it's predominantly tongue and pulse. And I guess the bit that I wonder whether there's differential outcome is if you don't have that constant dialogue and history taking that you might get in the more protracted session, because if there isn't much of a difference in terms of outcomes, then from a cost effectiveness point of view, this just rocks. So that, I'm interested in that. And just in terms of expanding this into the NHS, the ICSs are in such an early formation stages of what are they there for. But to the extent ostensibly they are there to deal with population health and reduction in health inequalities, I think any of the language of outcomes that speaks directly to health inequalities, which seems to sit exactly with what you're doing, is going to play into commissioners' ears, and possibly even bypassing commissioners and going straight, for example, to Oki Health, to people who are budget holders, but happy to have that conversation outside. But just brilliant. Thank you. The integrated care systems is the new architecture within the NHS intended to bring together health and social care, but still, unfortunately, NHS over here and other providers over there, but an opportunity certainly to bring health and voluntary sector much closer together. Effectively, they will be replacing clinical commissioning groups.
CCGs.
Yeah, CCGs. Thank you.
I can only add what I know from some of the the projects that I've worked in and the research I've been doing for this talk. So when I talked about the outcomes for Gateway, which was 96% with moderate or significant improvement, that was out of 400. And then when we did acupuncture for NHS, it was only out of 165, but we did have 86%, so again very high. So that was 1-to-1, and obviously Gateway's multibed. So I don't know if anybody else is aware of any other data or research projects that can speak a bit more to the difference between outcomes.
Just a little bit on the research. I think you have to remember part of what we'd be comparing it to, the so-called standard data. When you actually look at how that was delivered, sometimes it was effectively a multi-bed setting, particularly for osteoarthritis of the knee. So some of the clinical trials were multi-person. And I would imagine, because of the key delivery, let's say the bulk of it was done in Germany by doctors who practice acupuncture, the setting would not have been, you've got an hour, sit down, relax, and I'll take your full consultation. So it just becomes extraordinarily complicated to compare what was what. So any differences, we're going to need decades of data to pick it out. That would be my guess. But I don't think we have, when we look at the actual, what I would beat people over the head with data, say this shows acupuncture works, I wouldn't say that is the most full-on pure acupuncture around. It has been accommodated to be in a RCT.
That's what I really like, though, about Gateway, is Gateway is 6 traditionally trained practitioners who, yes, they work in a multidisciplinary team, but the specialist acupuncturists are all traditionally trained. So they will be offering a more full version of Chinese medicine rather than, a more medical version.
Hi. A couple of comments. I was struck by on the film, the guy who was talking about how peaceful the clinic was. So I'm really interested in the idea that a lot of people nowadays are kind of stuck in a chronic sympathetic nervous system dominance, certain underlying level of tension and stress. And the interaction with the practitioner is a kind of invitation to let that go and move into a more relaxed parasympathetic state. So that can be achieved through a long one-to-one communication between practitioner and patient. But clearly from that, it can also be achieved from just a long spell in a very quiet room. And I think that should never be underestimated, how healing that is, especially in community. I just wanted to also draw attention to an article in the Journal of Chinese Medicine, which is an interview with Graham McCracken from SourcePoint Clinic. It's free to download. I'll just get the title up.
I actually meant to mention that article. Thank you, Peter.
It's called Working Towards Clinical Excellence. For me, was very inspiring about it is it has all the qualities of a multi-bed with maybe possibly some extras. I don't know, because different multi-beds have different models. One is that one benefit to the patient is that the practitioners get together every week and discuss patients and share knowledge and information, because patients are treated by different practitioners. That's also good for learning for practitioners. But the other really interesting thing, I hope it still works, is they're just as interested in the welfare of the practitioner. So it's very easy to have a multi-bed model which is of great service to patients, but maybe not so good for practitioners, especially in terms of income. So they have a model where they pool all the income and practitioners get a reliable wage. It's not very high, but it gives them security of knowing what their income is going to be. And they have holiday pay and things like that. So I think it's really worth looking at that article to be inspired about different ways of running multi-bed clinics.
Yes, thank you, Peter. Source Point are really fantastic. They're a great example. And Graham is just like Lisa. He's very willing to share his experiences and expertise. He's a member of BAcC and will be on the expert panel that we're running on the Saturday of the conference. Shameless plug for conference again.
Thank you for a really inspirational talk. It was really good, thank you. I'm hopefully this week going to be a new graduate, and I've always wanted to do multi-bed from the get-go. The area that I'm in is quite economically deprived. So, you know, I'm very fortunate, whereas other people are not so fortunate. So therefore, I do want to. I'm renting a space that's got two potential for two kind of bed chair things, and that's kind of it. But we're only kind of trained and geared up for one-to-one. So, is there a mentoring and support with ACMAC? And is there a potential? So I'm actually not that far from Brighton. I'm kind of Portsmouth, to visit kind of, you know, a clinic to see how it's set up and how treatments flow, rather than, you know, kind of you go from one to another and that kind of thing. Is that feasible at all?
Yeah, the answer to most of those questions is yes. So the first thing I would recommend to you is we regularly, our founder Charlie regularly runs an online workshop on setting up a multi-bed, and more recently she's started one that is geared towards students and new graduates. So I would first of all recommend that. We do have also a mentoring program where you are able to have one-to-one hours with our board members based on what you need help with. So that's also available. And yet you're more than welcome to come to observe myself or one of my team members in clinic. I'm a Tuesday afternoon if you want to come on a Tuesday afternoon. I start at 2 o'clock. I actually also work on a Monday now as well, so Monday or Tuesday you're more than welcome to come and have a look at how we do it at HCA. It's really good because we're now back to our pre-pandemic teams and layouts, so we've got 6 couches, 2 practitioners. But yes, you're always more than welcome. Did that answer everything, did I? Yes. So join ACMAC.
Ooh, hello. No, not at all. Hi, thanks ever so much. That's really interesting. It's really good to see different approaches to doing a multi-bed. When I graduated, I started off in a multi-bed with another practitioner, and it ended up that the multi-bed actually closed, and various reasons contributed to that. And the main one was that we had slightly different ideas about what the multi-bed was looking like. I did an audit for my patients, and they all liked to, because the room was screened off, so we had couches behind screens, and my patients like the privacy. And I practice 5-element style, so we do a lot of things like AE drains or internal dragons, so people are having to take things off. And there was a concern that they didn't want to do that in a room with everybody else where they could see them. And I didn't know how to square my practice with working in an open situation, because for me, doing an AE drain quite near the start or at the beginning of their treatment is like, that's quite important for our school. So that's where I start my treatment. So if somebody's coming from a multi-bed and I'm only maybe able to do command point areas like elbows downwards or knees downwards and people don't want to take clothes off, I found that it started to impact my treatment plan and what I could achieve with them. If they wanted or needed some REN points or dew points, they didn't all want to take things off. And I couldn't square my treatment planning with the room situation, with my patients' expectations and comfort. So I'm just wondering what kind of challenges you've had in that kind of area and how you overcame that.
Well, it's quite interesting you mentioned that, actually. When I first started working at HCA, we were a completely open plan clinic. We didn't have screens. We just had 6 couches and they were all just in the same room and everybody was really fine with that. Since COVID, we have screens to make everybody feel a bit safer. And I think now our patients are used to them being there and I don't think we would ever be able to take them away. But in terms of, were your patients uncomfortable because of something culturally, or was it just...
No, they just were, a lot of them were older people, or it was actually in a mental health resources centre, and I don't know how that impacted their sense of needing to feel safe.
And were you not able to use screens? Or?
Yeah, I did, but there was then discussion with the other practitioners in the room about, because they wanted the idea of community chi, and feeling that shared space and shared energy. But my patients didn't feel completely comfortable with that, and I didn't know how to resolve that situation, really.
My initial thoughts on that would be whether or not you could have, I don't know how many couches you were running in the room, but if you were if some people wanted it to be open and some people wanted it to be screened, whether or not you could do kind of a set of couches that are more screened in one part of the space and a more open, you know, that could be a possible way to remedy it.
Yeah, we did try that. I had my couch screened off, but there was a general feeling that then that was blocking the chi in the room. So I ended up actually moving into the room next door and just basically running my own. That became just a one-to-one normal clinic, and the room next door was a more open space with no screens. So it ended up kind of, I mean, in one of the speeches, they were saying that there was like a private screened area and then an open area as well. So that's essentially kind of what we evolved into. But we also kept our own patients. So I only saw people that had come and seen me first off. We didn't share patients, or we didn't share income. It was very much, I had my list, if you like, and the other practitioners had their list, and there wasn't any crossover. So yeah, so sometimes I'd have a patient and the other practitioner wouldn't, and then sometimes they had 2 and I didn't have anybody. So, you know, there was that sort of situation really, and I just didn't know how to progress that in a...
I mean, to me, it sounds a little bit like it might be worth going back at, maybe even coming to an organisation like BAcC and talking about the area that you're in, and perhaps trying to find a team which have a more similar outlook on how the clinic's going to run and what options are going to be available, because it sounds like maybe there was just a bit too much of a clash in that particular instance.
Yeah, I think you know, I think as the clinic evolved, we were kind of evolving slightly differently with the space, and so it ended up folding.
Yeah, I mean, that's a real shame.
Yeah, it was actually, but you know.
But it sounds like the need was there. So if it's folded, then maybe looking at finding some other practitioners and looking at a sort of restart sounds like a good... What area is it, if you don't mind me
asking? It was in Nottingham.
Oh, okay. So, yeah, I'm sure an area that really needs accessible acupuncture.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
Sorry, I don't know if that was necessarily helpful,
No, it was just I wondered whether or not there was something sort of glaring that I was missing in terms of how I'm practicing or setting up space for...
Claire, can I just let Beverly have one more question and we'll finish? So
yeah, of course. Sorry.
Be uber punctual.
Thank you, Claire. That was a very wonderful and compelling presentation. I have to admit, I have feared the multi-bed, and now you converted me, and I want to start up 3.
She's an Avenger.
So, can you tell me what single piece of advice you would give to me as a startup, as a new startup?
Well, during the second lockdown, I felt so concerned about mental health in my local area that I managed to set up a multi-bed in 5 days. So you don't have to become really concerned about the process, and don't become too stressed about it. I would definitely recommend checking out the online workshop with Charlie. If you're an established practitioner, she's got one that's for more established practitioners, and that's really where she can go through all the aspects that you need to think about before you start, in terms of finding a space, the equipment that you're going to need, and whether or not you need to think about whether or not you want to work alone or as part of a team. So there are a few key aspects you'll have to think about, but that's a great place to start to really tick everything off. But it doesn't have to, it can be done, and it can be done quickly. It's just up to you to decide what sort of size it's going to be.
Okay, thank you for that, because I was looking at all this information and thinking I'm going to have to do months of prep and planning, so thank you. I'll let you know how I get on.
Okay, so I'd like to say a very big thank you to Claire for coming up and giving us a tour. Right.